going to go ahead and get started, and we might have some others join us in a little bit. But I want to go ahead and make sure you guys can see my screen. So welcome to the UXSA community meetup for November. And we're going to have a presentation this evening with Ryan Ramsey, and he's from Second Wave Dive, and he has a new topic that none of us have heard. So we're really excited about that. We will have the presentation and a QA session. And after that, we'll have announcements and door prize drawing, as well as some networking after that. So stick around if you want to do that. And the door prize is a $25 gift card to Rosenfeld Media or Amazon we try to encourage you to get a user experience book, but you can do what you want with it. But it's just for showing up, and it's a lot of fun. So we want to make sure on the housekeeping things to make sure that you tell us who you are in the chat and send any of your questions through chat for Ryan during the talk. Eve is going to be your assistant on the chat this evening. She will be answering questions or and helping facilitate with the questions for Ryan. And if you need to raise your hand when it's time, to speak and do the networking thing, use the hand raising part. It's under your participants window. So I think that's it for the housekeeping. I did want to make sure you understood that we understand that that culture is either created by default or intention, and we intentionally want the culture at UXSA to be supportive of curiosity and growth and networking and inclusion. We want everyone to feel safe to ask any question and not feel like they're going to ask a stupid question or that they won't be taken seriously. This is a learning place. This is a community for support. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that you can reach out and connect. And we do have several places you can connect with us. We have a Facebook page, LinkedIn, we have Slack that's pretty active. We're on it all the time. And we have a YouTube page that you can subscribe to get videos for all of our previous sessions, as well as this one this evening. Will be put there once it's completed. We also have a website that we're working on. And of course, the meetup group where you came in for tonight. So you can send messages through there as well. And we wanted to thank our sponsors for helping us this past year. It's helped us, with the remote work, and we did have one hybrid meeting in August, but it didn't go so well. So we're just going to stay remote for a little while. It's hard to do hybrid. But we are excited about the sponsors that we have. Aquint is doing portfolio reviews in AMA sessions that we're not recording, so that you can speak open, speak freely and not worry about it being shared, and tech systems as well. So we're grateful for their help, and Firecat Studio, of course, Susan and her team. But tonight our focus is on Ryan Ramsey, and it's time we claim our agency presentation. So Ryan, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and start your presentation.
Thank you all for having me here. I am excited. I am going to do a little bit of Zoom trickery right now, which is to say I only have one monitor, but I'm going to present in Keynote and use a little Zoom trickery so that I can actually see my presenter notes. Now you should see my slide. Is that all right? All right. Okay. Perfect. So let's talk about claiming our collective agency. This is a new talk, and I just gave it for the first time last week at a conference called Business Times Design. And what I can tell you is from this talk, you might have some feelings about what I have to say. And what I can say is your feelings are completely valid and completely okay to have. Before every talk, I thought I would share a little bit about where I start. So you should know that this is my world. These crazy band of folks here are my world. Everything really begins and ends with my partner and our children. I have lived in a variety of places throughout my life, and I thought I would show you that everything shows up as a meme. So I spent a lot of my formative years in both Arizona and New Jersey, lived in LA for about 7 years, moved to Austin, Texas for the first time in 2007, took a detour through Switzerland for about 3 years, back to Austin in 2015. And then this summer, we left Austin and we moved to Vermont. I've also had a variety of jobs before I ever became sort of a professional, whatever it is we are now. My first job was at a farm. During the winters, I was a ski instructor. During the 90s, I helped set up raves as an event coordinator. And I was also a professional actor for about 3 years while moonlighting, making websites. I am very, very passionate about music. Music is kind of how I see the world through music. I love to travel, love art. I am a massive fan of the Liverpool Football Club, and this is Ziggy Stardust, our Labradoodle, who's about 4.5 years old. You should know also that really everything about me in my career, what I hold most true are the relationships and amazing, amazing, talented people that I've had the fortunate of working with and working alongside over these years. And these are the people who inspire me every day. You should probably know a little bit about my professional career too, that I've maybe at one point in my career had a similar role to what you are in now or what you've had before, whether it just as a designer or getting into management, even up through sort of the executive ranks. And what we're going to talk about today is really based on this shift that I took when I left sort of the individual contributor role, that lead design role, into management and into the executive ranks. The things that we're going to talk about are not, say, only applicable to there, but really this is when I began to think about claiming agency. But again, everything begins and ends with these folks. So for the next 20-ish minutes, I want to talk about stuff you should know to challenge the status quo and keep your soul. You all have amazing individual talents that you should absolutely maintain and have as your core part of you. But perhaps you want to also challenge the status quo. And this challenging the status quo should not come at the cost of your soul. And maybe what we might want to start out with is, well, gee, Ryan, we already know a lot of stuff. We've learned a lot of stuff over the years, or are continuing to learn. Why do we need to learn more stuff? And what I would say, and I always sort of start from this place, is that really for the last 10 to 15 years, I would say really since the advent of the App Store that Apple produced, design has sort of exploded. Design has really been all the rage. That the App Store sort of created this atmosphere where now everybody needed designers on their teams to make all this software that was now present. And really, we kind of have been telling our colleagues in business and engineering that, no, we're also part of this too, that there's this third leg of this stool. And they totally bought it. They bought into it. And they've said, yes, we need design as well. And we've made tremendous progress. How do we know this? Well, a lot of our materials, our resources, our knowledge is now showing up in all sorts of new places, not only in our books, not only in our meetings, but now in reports, now in periodicals and magazines like Harvard Business Review and Fast Company. And we have examples of all these amazing companies that we look up to in a variety of ways that share their case studies, tell us how much design has played a role in their success. And a big one, we have design executives I think if you would have looked back at, say, 2008, 2010, we could have maybe counted 5 or so digital design executives that were actually present. That weren't that many. And now they are very prevalent. They are all around us. A VP of design is not an unknown thing. Perhaps, though, the most important and intriguing thing is there are now over 250,000 designers who are employed. They are making a living doing this thing called design. And that, my friends, is phenomenal. That is like 3 Wembley stadiums. Imagine Queen giving their 1985 performance on tour, this 2-hour amazing concert, and they're doing it 3 nights in a row, and it's only filled with designers. That, my friends, is tremendous, tremendous progress that we've made. Yes, and yes, I would say that is that tremendous progress. And yes, there's maybe still this gap here. And I'm wondering if you can see it. And that gap that we might have, it might be framed in sort of this situation, this scenario. And that is to say that in the last 5 years, the number of companies employing more senior design leaders has doubled. It's doubled in just 5 years. And yet, at that same time, despite this, 90% of the companies that have done so have indicated they don't believe design is really reaching its full potential. And when I see this stat, when I see this information here, I don't think about, say, design leaders and that sort of progress we've made. I say, what's going on with that 90%? And really, the makeup of that 90%. Who is that 90%? And what I can see and what I've observed over the many years and what I've talked about with lots of peers and colleagues is that when we think about the 90%, well, that 90% is really still sort of the same voices and profiles that it was 20 years ago. That a lot of the behaviors and beliefs that make up that 90% are still much like they were, say, 20 years ago. A lot of the decisions and policies, a lot of the way that companies are defining value, still pretty much the same. Those factors are the same as it's ever been. Okay, so I mentioned feelings at the top, and I'm going to say warning. This is the point of the talk where feelings may surface. What I would say is that I think when it comes to that 90%, many of us are still naive in understanding how rooted those organizational beliefs and practices and policies really are. And I would say that many of us are often pushing too hard in the wrong direction to change those policies and beliefs. And a lot of times we're using the wrong tools for the right problems. And when we do those things, when we're naive and we're using the wrong tools and pushing hard in the wrong direction, I would maybe argue that we're actually propping up the existing beliefs of what good is. We're not actually changing that perspective. So again, I warned you, feelings, you might have had some feelings at this point. So again, this tremendous, tremendous progress that we've made, wonderful. But my friends, a seat at the table without power is a trap. And so for me, this is the next stage of design, the next sort of ambition of design. This is the gap to address. But what do we do? What do we do with all this? This should be playing a lovely Elmo GIF that's not playing for some reason going, huh? Who? What? And so what I think is that we've been doing a lot of hard work. We've made tremendous progress over the last 10, 15 years that's led to this progress. And yet there's still this gap. And the idea and policies and behaviors and beliefs and that definition of value just won't magically change. So something needs to be done. Somebody needs to be doing something different. And that, my friends, is us. I believe it's us. And when I mean us, I mean you, and I mean you, and I mean you. We need to claim our collective agency as design leaders in order to reach the higher potential of design and in order to get to that level where we're really influencing the status quo. Now, perhaps you're also wondering, like, how in the hell did you get to this point? This is not talking about Figma. This is not talking about research. This is not talking about any of these things that we talk about a lot. So let's talk about it. As I mentioned at the top, I've had a variety of jobs at these places, worked for myself, worked for a lot of big organizations, but I want to tell a story right here in the middle. And the framing of that story starts when I left Apple to join Electronic Arts, the video game company. So it was March of 2011. And after 4 years at Apple, I took an opportunity to become a senior manager and build a team from scratch. This were program managers, designers, researchers, and sort of that front end engineers, sort of that legged stool model, if you will. And I was going to be responsible for building this from scratch. But during the interview process, I really believed that I was exactly what they needed. My expectations was that this company, Electronic Arts, had sort of reached a breaking point, and that they needed my help, that they were ready for design to sort of take the lead. I was so naive and maybe so bold in this thinking that I even took a picture on my first day at Electronic Arts in headquarters in Redwood City, California. And so I said, this is the path forward. And my expectations were that the very definition of value was going to change. I thought that what had worked for me at Apple as an individual designer would work for me at EA as an organizational leader. And within weeks of taking that job, I felt completely overwhelmed and out of place, even while working for the same boss. That boss was not the same. And the only indication that I could give you other than me telling that is that I never posted again on Instagram for another year. And the next picture that I posted on Instagram was me up in the middle of the night, 12:25 a.m. because I could not sleep. I was anxious. I was feeling way out of sorts, like I had made the wrong decision. And why I was feeling that way was because as soon as I arrived at EA, with all this energy, they were ready for me to sort of take charge and lead them in a new direction. How very naive of me. I started getting emails like this. Hey, so glad you're here. So I already have this idea of what an app should be. It's going to have 6 core features, 6 nice to have, 6 design goals. I'm going to go buy some iPads tomorrow so we can make it happen. My boss. And then I started getting emails like this. Oh, by the way, before you got here, I told the C-suite that this stuff that we were already working on before you even were here, that it was just going to work. And it's shipping tomorrow. And I need you to just sign off that you approve of this design because you're here now. And I also got emails like this. Ryan, I know you're here to build and scale this team, but we forgot to add additional headcount for your team to the budget before you got here. So you're just going to have to work with what we already have. And after receiving those types of messages, I felt completely powerless. I felt, stupefied. I was not ready for that challenge. And as a little side note, as a cis white man, I experienced easy mode in that first year. I experienced the easiest version of that. And that sort of relationship, that being treated in sort of that way was a surprise to me, meant I was really complicit in the cover up that these were challenges faced by so many others before me. So what did I do with that challenge? I did what a lot of designers do. I think I grabbed every single tool in my toolbox to try to prove my worth. I was trying to advocate for change with pixels. And my friends, pixels do not have any power. And what I can tell you is that it did not work. It did not work the way I had hoped it would be. And it really reached a head when I was at a meeting with all the senior leaders and my boss in a room. And my boss came up with the idea that, hey, last night I was buying a refrigerator on Amazon. And this is what happened when I was buying that refrigerator. We should do that. And in that meeting, I said, that doesn't make any sense. We're providing customer support for people who play video games. I just don't see how that is relevant. Let me tell you, that was not a conversation that went in my favor. I was belittled and, pretty shamed after making that statement. And so this was one of those meetings that took, a couple hours that we were all in the room, and we had a break. And what I can tell you is that I felt worthless at that point. I felt like, geez, what have I done? I've made a terrible mistake. But really, I was stuck. I was stuck, and I did not know how to get unstuck. But again, as a very fortunate person, I had a wonderful, wonderful colleague who saw me in my struggle right at that time and gave me a new lens to see my problems through. This is my friend, Jeff. We're colleagues at Apple and Electronic Arts twice, a wonderful peer, mentor, friend, all of those things. And what Jeff did during that break in that meeting is he took me out to the paths behind our building and we went for a walk. And Jeff comforted me. And what he told me was, Ryan, you are right most of the time. I don't know that I've met anybody who's been as right as you usually are. But you really need to learn how to invite others to be right with you. You need to learn the art of letting other people have your way. And when he took that time, he helped me see that my peers and my stakeholders and my colleagues were just people with pains and deadlines and budgets and egos and fears. But what he really did is he saw me and he validated my experience. And by doing that, he helped me find new solutions. And feeling seen and validated, what that did for me was really allowed me to push me to change my actions. That was all the prompt that I needed. And so when we walked back into that room, back into that office after that sort of tense discussion, I just made a choice. And I pinched my leg under the desk to remind myself to shut up. Not because I didn't think I had things worth sharing, but just to give myself a sense of change. How might I act in a different way? Well, usually in these meetings I talk. So in this meeting, I was not going to talk. And instead, I allowed the meeting to kind of go on. And what I did while I was pinching my leg was I decided that I was going to send my boss an email after the meeting. And I said, hey, boss, when you talked about buying that refrigerator on Amazon, it really helped me to think in a new way. Thank you. Now, what we ended up discussing was what I had in mind all along. But the change was making sure that my boss felt seen and validated. And what I can tell you is that when I saw and validated my boss, they changed how they made decisions from that day on. I won't lie to you, it was not an ideal situation for me, but it was one that I then learned and was able to continue to learn and feel somewhat safe, even though it wasn't my ideal situation. And so after this, after moving beyond and moving to other companies, I began running little experiments like that. Maybe not literally pinching my leg, but running these little experiments of how I might act in a slightly different way and how I might see and validate my colleagues. And while I was at these leadership tables, what I learned is every sort of different table I went to, I was really walking backwards every time. It felt like there were other structures, other things in place that I was not quite familiar with. And I found sometimes that I was over-explaining myself, that I was explaining things over and over again. And what I learned is that if you're ever trying to explain yourself over and over again, that's a huge red flag that it's not actually going to work. And that transition of moving over from, say, an individual contributor role into management, I was still thinking as an individual contributor, that I expected the work to speak for itself because that's how it worked when I was an individual contributor. But when you're in management and you're not working in that day-to-day building and making and those types of decisions, the work does not speak for itself because we don't have that context. And one of the biggest things that I had to learn was not everyone was going to like me for trying to do things differently. And I had to be okay with that. And that was more a lot of self work, not so much related to professional work, but I had to be okay that not everyone would like me. And all this type of work of trying to see and validate colleagues, to try to change policy and beliefs, to try to change behavior, this was much, much harder than building an app. This was taking much, much longer than ever building a website. And I had made more things happen when I let go of having my own way, when I allowed other people to be invited in, to be curious with me and to be right with me. And after doing this for, say, about 10 years or so, it's really made me rethink the role of the design executive. And maybe this will be relevant to you all. I'm not sure if we have any design executives in the room. This talk was really aimed at an audience of design executives. But why I think it may be relevant to you is because I think as the executive leader of a function, that person's responsibility, the goal of their job is to make happen what no other function can. And as a design industry, just in general, even executive designers, we talk a lot about making what no other function can. We talk about our culture, our things, all sorts of things that are just about us and what nobody else can do. But I believe what the executive leader, the great executive leader, does best is make happen. They make things happen. And so we've been talking about this in a sort of roundabout way, but I've never actually defined what agency is. An agency is the capability to act or produce a particular result. And when it comes to decision-making inside of companies, with colleagues, all these types of things, there are many factors that go into decision-making. And what we talk about a lot is money and ambition and incentives and culture and risk tolerance and all these types of things. But just as important are things like racism, kindness, sexism and bias and families of origin and inspiration. Those go into the decision-making as well. And I think for a long time, I wished that those things didn't exist and they never went away. And what I can tell you is that wishing that things like misogyny or racism or narcissism don't exist will not make them go away. So again, Elmo slide that's not working. What do we do? What do we do with all this? And what I would tell you is that this is not a business problem to solve. This is not a design problem to solve. That changing decisions and how they get made is a systems problem to solve. And we need to approach this from a systems perspective. And the way I think about these systems is there's business stuff involved, product stuff involved, practices or process stuff involved, and there's a whole lot of people stuff involved. And what I can tell you is, here was the slides I meant to build out for that. But what I can tell you is that then every organization has a different shape of how these different factors are involved in decision making. And we have a few USAA alumni here, maybe even still current USAA employees. And what I found when I was there is that USA was very much a relationship company. That a lot of decisions were made by people stuff, how we relate to each other, how we communicate with each other, how we trust each other, and a lot of process stuff too. A lot of this is how we work. But I never heard a lot or too much on the product side or the business side that these were the things that made the most sense. And conversely, when I worked at Electronic Arts, it was a lot of product-based decisions, a lot of people stuff, but not a lot of business stuff either. Conversely, at Nestle, lots of relationship stuff, lots of business stuff, very little on the product sort of side of things. And my time at Apple, this was when it was most balanced, I would say, of all these things. So we talked about what agency was as the definition, is that capability. But having agency is choosing how to act in response to those factors that are real. And we've been walking backwards for a very long time. And what I can tell you is that there are all sorts of structures and frameworks, ways to practice how we can approach this from a systems perspective that we never knew about. And after doing this type of stuff for about 10 years, what have I seen that's working? Well, the first thing that I could say is you have to go beyond what's already expected of you. That helps make things happen. So our colleagues expect us to talk about design. Our colleagues expect us to share Figma files or sketch files or, give a journey map. That's what's expected. That's sort of base level now. What's maybe not expected is that we just use their PowerPoint deck and don't try to redesign it. We keep the structure and just go with it. And what's expected is that we're always going to have an opinion or some type of recommendation. But maybe what's not expected is that we're going to actually do some analysis, some pros and cons of what our recommendation will or won't provide. And I think a lot of times they expect us to show the same artifacts that we bring to every meeting. And I think what's not expected is to acknowledge when that artifact isn't working and we give it away. And lastly, I think what's expected is that we're going to debate over how we should do things. And maybe what's not expected is that we just try their approach first. Let's prove them wrong. The second thing that I've seen over the last 10 years of doing this is that connecting design actions with other decisions makes things happen. Again, we talked about different analysis. Expose the areas of risk that they care about inside of your analysis. If they care about money, if they care about time, if they care about velocity, include how that's at risk when you give your recommendation. And when you're talking about your hypotheses, connect those to their conclusions. If we improve accessibility, this is important. We believe that that will improve trust with the product. And when we improve trust, that will increase adoption. So it's good to connect our hypotheses to there. That creates good experiments. I think the third thing that I've found is that remixing what is already valued makes things happen. Again, we talk about these PowerPoint decks that we look at and we go, gosh, the fonts are terrible. There's white space, the contrast, all these things are terrible. And what we might not know is that this is a tremendously valued communication device. This structure has been taught to our colleagues for years and years and years. This structure originated in the 1960s by Barbara Minto and has been taught in business schools ever since. And what we might not know is that trying to argue with the idea of something like OKRs, that it's the wrong type of model, we might not know that we might be able to just remix something and create a new spin, but still borrows a lot of that same language. This is a framework that I use with teams called POKRs, where we sort of give a cause and effect relationship between the objectives themselves. It helps us make sense of things. And when we can make sense of things, we can then show how our sense relates to their sense. And over time, then we can begin to track and monitor how our decisions work and how they are working well or maybe not so well. And lastly, what I would say, what I've learned is that intentional, small, and measurable actions make things happen. And that's a little scary. I would say we should not change who we completely are by any means. That's too radical. It removes all the things that we do well. But by adding little small things that are a little bit uncomfortable for us over time, that we get a little more comfortable with, allows us to embrace it a little bit more. And maybe one of the things that we can start with is like, do we really know our colleagues very well? We have these tools and we have these abilities to have empathy for customers. Do we actually know what our colleagues are on the hook for? Do we know their jobs to be done, what's painful for them, what they might be able to gain if they do a good job? Do we intentionally look at power inside of an organization and specifically and intentionally choose who we might choose to be our sidekick, who might be willing to experiment with, so that we can build a coalition of the willing. And when it comes to active listening, can we reuse a dialogue script that doesn't come from business or design, but comes from a relationship theory and allows us a structure to actually demonstrate that we see and validate our colleagues before we try to tell them something else to do? So a couple of comforting final thoughts, hopefully, now that I've maybe scared you and frightened you and given you feelings. I absolutely believe that we need to challenge the beliefs of what value is right now. It's incredibly, incredibly important. If we want our organizations to change, we must lead with our own change. The change is not outside of us. It's not an external problem to fix. It is us. But if we want to challenge the beliefs of what value is, we need to influence the behaviors and policies that are based on those beliefs. It requires us to change. And you as designers are probably the most well-positioned to affect change once you are comfortable with inner change. Again, planting small, innocuous seeds of change are often more impactful than any billion-dollar transformation project will ever be. And lastly, actively being better to the humans that we make things for and that we make things with has proven over my career to create value beyond financial returns time and time again. So that's my talk. If you want to learn some weird stuff like this, if you want to learn how maybe to speak in different dialogues, learn a little bit about what your colleagues' perspectives might be, I wrote a free book with Envision. Totally available at designbetter.co. It's in digital format, PDF. You can download it as an audiobook as well. And my company, Second Wave Dive, is a school for mid-career people who feel like they're walking backwards. But for people who really might aspire to be a different type of senior leader or executive, to be somebody different than maybe who they work for now. We do have another course coming up. I lead this weird 12-week program. It used to be 6, now it's 12, where we get into these things and we practice these things intentionally, and we provide critique and feedback to each other. And that's it. That's it from me. What I would say is you absolutely got this. You have got this, and I believe in you. Thank you for your time. Yeah. How can we chat?
Well, Ryan, thanks so much. I do have feelings. And having taken your course before, I know the impact that it had on my career. It's been amazing learning from you, and I saw some of the same ideas in there, but I love how you've framed it and presented it today. Do we have any questions, Eve, that you want to ask that's in the chat? Eve, are you there?
Yeah, I'm going through it.
Okay. I think Susan had one earlier, but.
Do you want to just ask Susan?
Sure. My question was, when you're talking about the varying sizes of bubbles, do you think that was from your perspective or company-wide or comme ça?
Right. I think my experience is my own. I'm obviously going to have rose-tinted glasses. I'm going to see it in a particular way. But I think I'm also a pretty good researcher. And we were on the same team. I think that have you ever heard of the term feminology? Feminology is the act of being able to sort of document a lived experience, but sort of from outside of your body in a way. And so I think when I see those shapes, those are things that I've observed myself, but there were also things that I heard from colleagues
Mhm.
observing and repeating back to me.
Right.
You've
But
worked
in-
at a
That's what-
company, yeah, with me. Was that a shape that seemed to
I think
resonate?
it was, so this is why I'm interested in this discussion. I think that our charge makes us see the bubbles in a different size. And because of it, and the larger the organization is, the less confident I am that I understand what it's like for everybody in all the different parts of the organization. Because we were in a weirdly insular part of the company. We did see
Sure.
representatives from different product lines, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that it made me think is, in a super mature company that is inherently slow to innovate, the product isn't talked about as much because it doesn't change, not because it's not important, but because everybody assumes they know what it is.
That's right. Well, I would say, right, we were at a very insular, but also at a place where we could see in front of us, we had access to corporate level, business level decision making, you know. And so when I'm talking about like beliefs and behaviors and all those things, I'm really talking about the 90% of like where the big decisions and policies and culture and all that gets defined. There's a lot of decision making that happens at the execution level, you know,
Right.
X-fold of what happens at the executive level.
Right.
But those shapes are really defined by those core policies, you know, of like, this is how we work. We know the product. That all comes from a place where those policies are defined. And the way I see it is that lots of organizations, you get that when that's how it's felt at the top. This is how we are. The other thing that I would say too, Susan, is I've been very, very fortunate. It's super rare to work for a company where the product defines the business rather than the business defines the product. So at Apple, design was a core fundamental piece of the business model because it said, we make amazing hardware. Even when they first came out, like the design of the original or desktop that they sold was literally baked in to that. And so they would say, we build product to then get us business. And I think at most companies, we're in business, which we need some product. And so fundamentally, I think, you know, Nestle was sort of the same way of, then it just becomes, when product isn't the core, it's an accessory.
Mhm.
Then that's how you get like big process and people bubbles, not sort of, well, that doesn't make business sense. That doesn't make product sense, right? Like these types of things.
The whole resistance to innovation interests me greatly because I'm hired to innovate. And I go in and the last thing they fucking want is to innovate.
But Susan,
You know,
let's be historians for a moment.
okay.
Tell me a large established company that has innovated anything, like really, like at the market level. Could Hyatt create an Airbnb? Could Boeing create a Tesla? So when we talk about sort of, and this is a very US based thing, now we're getting into like US particular spin on capitalism and all those types of things, meaning just that innovation, when it comes to that radical innovation, is not born in an existing companies. I mean, this is like, it's born out of that weird model of venture capital. That's not to say
Barnes
that
and Noble.
Barnes and Noble, okay. What was their radical innovation that they
It
created?
wasn't, it was radical innovation that they
It
created.
wasn't, it was imitation.
Okay, so
They were
imitation is different.
forced to,
That's right. So
Right?
that's not innovation, that's imitation. Look at China as a company or as a country, not really a radical innovative country when what they're making, but in the last 20 years or so, now they're able to, right? Because they have sort of structured even their version of capitalism or whatever it is in a way to say, we're going to intentionally try to create some radical stuff. But so you can call an organization innovation org every day if you want, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But when you have a company of 35,000, the majority of those employees and the majority of the business leaders are there to maintain the market advantage that they already have. And it's usually too late for them to then say, oh, wait, we got to go replace our own market advantage. Very few companies are looking to destroy themselves to then go find the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So-
I'm speaking very, this is very Ryan hot take, this is not science at all. Go
I
ahead,
did
Bob.
ask Bob if he
You mentioned Hyatt, and it brought to mind, what about Hyatt Place? When you consider that kind of an innovation? So I remember traveling in 06, 07 and just happened to choose Hyatt Place for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it was completely innovative. They took a building that looks like a Motel 6, 3 stories, 2 wings.
Yeah.
That's it. And a pool on one end. That was about it. Not
Right.
that many luxury until you walked into the room. Every
Mhm.
room was a suite with a
Right.
huge triangle couch and a huge thing and a 42-inch flat panel. This is 2008.
Right.
No one had a 42-inch flat panel TV.
Right.
They
Right.
still had that sucky digital radio on the table, but that's another story.
So is that,
But
Bob,
so,
yeah.
so I thought that was innovative of them, or at least they looked, and they styled everything in retro 60s.
sure.
No one
Yeah.
else did that. I don't
Let's
think. I don't
go
I
full
think they
Palm
were the first
Springs. Yeah. Go
Yeah,
full
yeah,
Palm
yeah.
Springs. Right. So Bob, my question would be, is that radical or is that incremental?
Well, yeah. It's definitely not radical.
It's definitely not radical.
Yeah, but it was different.
Right. It's different. So that might have gained them more revenue, but it didn't displace them. It didn't displace core Hyatt, right? It didn't.
And they didn't put all their chips on that.
That's right. Like conversely, Apple, I'm just giving this example because I could think of it. Apple redefined a category with the iPod. There were already MP3 players. There were already digital media. They redefined a category there with iPod and iTunes. They replaced iPods. They completely abolished them with the iPhone. They, this huge thing that basically saved their company. They, you're talking about like literally 5 or 6 years later.
Ditched it.
Right. Gone.
Yeah.
Ditched it. And there are a few companies that are sort of made that way because they were made that way from the beginning. And, the thing I was chatting with a friend earlier today, the things that I teach now is not because I don't think designers should become business people. Like, I don't think. I teach what I teach now because I think the majority of that 250,000, they might not ever get to work for a company that from its core was design, where product defines the business, because it's just such a rare occurrence in the world. And what I want them to feel is that if they are then going to have to work for a company that business defines the product, that they shame themselves less, that they don't think they're broken because they're working for some brokenness, like that they have a couple of these new tools that just allows them to be more present, feel seen and validated in new ways, where they're, what I see so much is when a designer gets to that point in their career where they transition from, with headphones on, kind of doing this, and then suddenly the majority of their time is with other people. Suddenly I can't tell you how many come and they go, oh, I'm terrible at this. I'm awful. Why don't I feel the way that I did there? What is wrong with me? They really start to turn it in towards themselves. And so I teach this to say, no, I see you. I validate you. I'm just going to give you a couple things that allows you to know that you've done a good job. And if you do a good job and it's still crappy decisions around you, it's not your fault. Like, sometimes crappy decisions happen. One of the things that I shared in a different talk. So I had to give a workshop yesterday. 3.5-hour digital workshops are they're fine, but they're just not the same as in person. I miss that a lot. But doing this, I was talking about having showing this dialogue script and seeing and validating somebody and walking through, and that when we feel seen and validated, we're then willing to hear people. But as a side note, I said, you may do all that work, see and validate and empathize with your colleague, and you may ask them for a small behavior change in return, and they have every ability to say no. There's no guarantee that somebody's just gonna, like, they have the basic human rights as well to just not change. And that sucks. It's brutal. But in that moment, I want people to know that they've done a good job. That's where they can begin and end and separate themselves from where somebody else begins and ends. I'm getting far too into the
Well,
psychological side of things now.
Ian has a question that was from another person who asked if you had any advice for folks who are still individual contributors.
My advice is, and this is really experiential, take that role of management if you believe it's for you, and also know that it's an entirely different job. If you are really in service to people, right? And you want to be in service to people, it's a wonderful career choice. What I would also say is that as an individual contributor, you can do things, just these little things like using the PowerPoint slides that they use, learning about these structures. Like, I've written about these, they're on my blog, but situation, complication, resolution is a structure of how consultancies talk to each other, but it's all about sharing your rationale and your argument, where you just say, here's the situation we all agree is a situation.
Mhm.
Here are 3 complications that I see that create some risk for us. And here's a potential resolution that is not foolproof. And as an individual contributor, you can then show your rationale and your argument to your colleague. That is better than just say, I think this design is going to work.
I would also point to what you said in your talk. Don't expect the work to speak for itself.
Right. Yeah.
Very related to
Right.
what you're
Right.
talking about.
Yeah.
You can
it
tell
will.
people what they should think about it, and it will just go right in past the filter.
Yeah. I would say
9
too.
times out of 10.
Right. I would say too. And Susan, you and I have had these talks before. Susan can make a great journey map. She's a wonderful service designer, has the ability to analyze and see insights that is rare. And I would turn to Susan and I say, the problem to solve is not making a better journey map. The problem to solve is that journey maps get put in a drawer.
Mhm.
So what we have, Susan, I would see her present these and people would be excited about that she even has the ability to put all these things together. And they would have no ability to know what to do next. So as an individual contributor, when I say, like, if you find yourself repeating, I talked about this when I learned about building a scorecard for the first time at Apple in 2009. I happened to have a boss who just challenged me, who said, our colleagues are speaking in these weird spreadsheets. Do you think you can make one of those? And it was not like a threat, like, make one of these at your job. It was like, is that something that's possible? And I had no clue, but I had wonderful support to go figure it out. And I've lost my train of thought for a little bit, but in that moment, what I found was that I was already doing things like, user acceptance testing and technology acceptance testing and all sorts of like hardcore user research and analysis techniques. But what I found is that I kept trying to explain to my colleagues what this technique was, and they never got it. And so that speaking to people through a scorecard or whatnot was not me because I was trying to devise a new metric or figure out a new measurement. It was resolving a communication gap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those fundamental things that I think you could learn as an individual contributor, that a lot of times think about it as not translation, but localization. Localization is taking into people's different dialects. You know, French is one of the two common languages of the planet. I think there are more Spanish speakers than French, but the official, languages are English and French. But there's French spoken France, there's French spoken Switzerland, there's French spoken in Africa, there's French spoken in the Philippines, there's French spoken in Quebec, which is gosh awful slang. Quebecois is like, what are they saying? Right. And so what you have there are different dialects. And what I would suggest is, as a designer, is that you're not having to use their PowerPoint deck. But if you use their deck, you're putting your insights into their dialect. And it's going to be much easier for them to be able to understand what your insights are. Journey map, they don't have that background that you do. They can't see all the pieces that went into that. Remix, yeah. So
Yeah.
I have a fake board of directors for my company, and Weird Al Yankovic is on the board because it's all about sampling and remixing and taking other pieces that don't necessarily belong. And I wish I could put it to music.
And that's great. And I do have some thoughts on that, but I didn't know, Bob, if you wanted to share what really blew your mind about his presentation, if there was some aha moments for you.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Last year was a journey for me. And I've talked about it with several people. I'm on AT&T in our consumer technology area, the Standing Together Council. And so we've called it like the perfect storm of issues last year. The pandemic having to, for us, it wasn't that big of a deal for AT&T, but everyone having to work from home. The racial unrest of last summer and the election in the fall. And so what I found, though, is that meetings with people and understanding who they were and what they were about became more meaningful to me than the work I was doing. And so when you started talking about the techniques that you use and the revelations that you found, that it didn't really matter that the technology or whether you were up on this or up on that, but that you had to give people the floor to speak, and then you had to listen, and then you had to validate what they said. That really resonated, because I found that just naturally going through last year, and then kind of applying it this year as well, just in my job, to really understand the people I worked with, some who I was struggling with, some who I was angry at or frustrated with, to step back and to understand who they were as a person and what they were bringing to the table. So that made a lot of sense. And I've never thought, well, I guess just hearing you validate that about management makes so much sense to me, because in my mind, when you're managing other people, when you're trying to get them to do something that maybe they might not all want to do or do in the same way, it has to be a way of communicating with them and inviting them kind of to that path, rather than to say, we must do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. We all have to do this together. I'm not going to be able to have all the answers. I'm not going to be able to have all of the right technical knowledge. You have that. That's your expertise.
Yeah.
So, show that to me and contribute that to our end goal. To me, that makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Then so that's what I was saying. That really resonated with me.
Thank you for sharing. It's validating for me as well. Two things that I can think of. A lot of the vernacular, a lot of the lexicon that gets popularized, maybe out of academia, has really shitty labeling. Servant leadership being one, as a core academic premise, is spot on. But the fact that it's called servant, I think, gets a lot of times interpreted as, well, that just means you'll do what I want you to do, right?
You're a
So,
helper.
well, I think of it as like, I see a lot of individual contributors just going, well, like, you just make me happy, right? You're a servant to me. And what I can tell you is that getting into management, especially some senior level management, I don't think you can find a more important thing to do than to be in service to somebody that you might have to fire. To be truly in service to knowing that this is a human who has responsibilities, might have a family, might have a commitment that depends on this employment for their basic needs, to be in service to them even in those moments, and still have to make those very hard decisions. And I think that is something that you don't really see until you get to management. And I think I'll be frank, I think there's a lot of very average, if not below average, senior management out there who don't take that responsibility seriously. I mean, I've been in positions where I knew layoffs were going to happen a year in advance.
Wow.
Can you imagine holding that, knowing that, and still showing up and being in service to people around you? Right? I'm in a very privileged position. Again, as being a man, being a white man, being a straight white man, having no degree. I didn't finish school. I have 186 units of credits when I went to school for 5.5 years, and I was a mess and didn't actually finish with a degree. That then Apple would hire me, like that comes because of all these systematic things that I have. And I think the other thing that I can think of, Bob, and I have it on a post-it next to me, and this comes from my wife, my partner, who's a psychotherapist and way brilliant. She's so much better than I am in so many ways. She said this, Bob: there's only two things that you can build in your life. You can either build connection or you can build resentment. And I think what this last year and a half has done for a lot of people has sort of gotten them out of their stupor and going like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm building a lot of resentment.
Mhm.
And there's all this other stuff going on. I need to build some connection again.
A lot of reevaluation.
A lot of reevaluation. And I also go, right, power to an agency to now we're in a market where we can command some stuff. And that's fantastic. That's brilliant. And I also know how the markets work, that there's a lifespan to this, right? And
Right.
Yeah.
Get it while we can.
Yeah.
Before it flips again.
Yeah. Go get it. Go get your stuff. Go take care of your needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for everything, for the presentation and your insights. And if you guys are interested in his course or reading his book, we will be sharing that in the email that we send out afterwards as a reference. So we appreciate that. But thanks so much for your input. It was always insightful. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And Ryan is going to stick around so we can talk a little bit more later. That's all we have. And Joshua just came in. Josh just got here. He's late. Welcome, Josh. We're just closing. but that's all we have for you tonight.